He thought he was just an old man bringing home a quiet rescue dog. But when the power went out during a storm and panic gripped his chest like a vice, that silent puppy did something no one expected. He saved him without making a sound. What happens next will stay with you long after the video ends. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, give the video a like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The house had never been this quiet before. Not even after Clara died. Back then, the silence had been heavy, yes, but it had still been filled with memories. The hum of her radio, the soft rustle of her gardening gloves, the click of her teacup on the saucer. Now it just sat there, empty, waiting, like even the walls had stopped caring. Walter Finch sat on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed against his chest. It was morning, but he hadn't slept. His heart didn't ache in the physical way, not exactly. It was more like something invisible kept pushing on him from the inside. Like the quiet had claws. Outside, the train tracks stretched past the hills, curved gently away from the old wooden cottage. A freight train passed every morning around 6:12 a.m., but today, Walter didn't even notice it. He just stared at the framed photo on the nightstand, Clara, laughing at something off camera, a sunflower in her hand. He got up slowly, bones cracking like brittle twigs, and shuffled into the kitchen. The kettle whistled, but it didn't feel like a welcome. The cup he poured for himself remained untouched. He stood by the window and watched the yard. The grass was long. The wind didn't move much, he thought. Maybe I'll visit the shelter today, not because he needed a dog, not really. It was just something to do, something that wasn't sitting or remembering, just to look, he told himself aloud. That afternoon, Walter took the old Ford pickup into town. The shelter was tucked behind the library, a quiet brick building with chipping paint and hand-painted signs that said, "Adopt Hope" and "Paws Change Lives." He didn't expect much. Maybe a few barks, a few wagging tails. But what he found was something else entirely. He walked through the rows of kennels, each one lined with hopeful eyes and eager noses. Puppies jumped, tails smacked against the walls. Some barked like their lives depended on it. Volunteers moved from cage to cage, chatting with visitors, holding clipboards, offering leashes. Walter didn't feel anything. Not yet. Then he saw him. In the back corner of the last row, curled into a tight ball, was a pale yellow puppy. Labrador mix maybe. Not more than 8 months old. He didn't move. Didn't bark. Just stared, not at Walter, not at anyone, but into a kind of space that didn't belong to this world. "That one's Milo," said a soft voice behind him. A volunteer had appeared, a teenage boy with a gentle face and arms full of cleaning supplies. He came in 2 weeks ago. Someone left him at the gate. No note, no tag, just a paper collar with his name. Walter stepped closer. The dog lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met for the briefest second. There was something in that stare, not fear, not sadness, but something quieter. Older, like he'd seen too much of the wrong things too soon. "Doesn't bark?" Walter asked. "Hasn't made a sound since he got here," the boy replied. "Doesn't eat much either, but he watches everything. Like he's trying to figure out if it's safe to breathe." Walter crouched slowly, knees creaking like floorboards. "Hey boy," he whispered. Milo didn't move. But he didn't flinch either. Walter didn't know why he stayed there for so long. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was because he recognized that look, the one that said, "I'm not okay, but I don't want to bother anyone about it." He stayed until his legs protested, stood back up, turned to leave. But as he walked away, he heard it. Not a bark, not a whimper, but the sound of paws shifting slightly on cement. He looked back. Milo was watching him, not with hope, just with a quiet question. "Would you come back?" That was enough. 10 minutes later, Walter stood at the counter, filling out the paperwork with a pen that barely worked. The teenager handed him a leash and a bag of food samples. "You sure about this?" he asked. Walter nodded. "No," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." The ride home was silent. Milo sat in the back seat, unmoving, eyes locked on the window. Not excited. Not scared. Just still. When they reached the house, Walter opened the passenger door. Milo didn't budge. So Walter sat on the porch step, arms resting on his knees, and waited. Eventually, Milo jumped down, nose to the wind, ears flicking. He took a step forward, then another. No tugging, no pulling. Just walking like he was giving the world one more chance. The front door creaked open. Walter stepped aside. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Milo entered, slow, cautious. He paused near the old recliner, then lay flat on the wooden floor, legs out, head down, eyes wide open. Walter sat across from him. The kettle whistled. In the kitchen again, but he didn't get up. "You don't have to talk," Walter said after a while, eyes stinging. "I think I've done enough of that for both of us." Milo blinked. The house was still quiet, but somehow it didn't feel as empty. The first few days with Milo felt like living with a ghost. Not a scary one, just one that didn't make a sound. He moved through the house without a single bark or whimper, padding from room to room, like he was learning the blueprint of the place before deciding if he'd stay. Walter noticed it immediately. Milo didn't sniff or explore like most dogs do in new places. He just stood in doorways. Sometimes he'd sit with his back to the wall, eyes focused on whatever was in front of him. He didn't flinch at the creak of the fridge or the click of the old ceiling fan. But he didn't relax either. He barely ate. A few bites in the morning, a little more if Walter sat nearby in the evening. He drank his water carefully, like he was rationing it. Like he wasn't sure it wouldn't be taken away. Walter didn't push. He didn't try to teach tricks or call out commands. Instead, he talked. "Clara used to sit in that chair," he said one morning, pointing at the window seat where dust had gathered. "She'd read all afternoon. Mystery novels. Didn't matter if they were any good." Milo didn't look up. But Walter kept going anyway. "I don't know if you understand me," he said one night while watching the news, "but I figure you hear me just fine." Milo blinked slowly. His ears twitched at the sound of Walter's voice, but he still didn't come close. Then the storm came. It started just after sunset. The sky turned a heavy kind of gray that felt like it was pressing down on the house. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. Walter stood by the hallway closet, reaching for a flashlight. When it happened, the pressure in his chest, the tightness in his throat, the sense that the walls were closing in, his breath shortened. His hands trembled. He leaned into the closet door, eyes squeezed shut, trying to slow the spin inside his head. Panic. It wasn't new. It had crept in slowly after Clara passed, appearing now and then like an uninvited guest, but this time felt different. Stronger, louder. Then he heard it. Not thunder. Not wind. Soft claws on the hardwood floor. Milo. Walter opened his eyes just enough to see the dog standing beside him, not barking, not pacing, just standing there, solid and calm. Then, gently Milo leaned in. Not a hard shove, just enough weight against Walter's leg to remind him he wasn't alone. Walter slid to the floor. His back hit the hallway wall. He wrapped one arm around Milo's side, the other pressed to his chest. The dog stayed perfectly still, breathing slow and even. Eventually, Walter's breath matched his. In, out, in, out. When Clara was alive, she would place her hand on his back when he got like this. Not say a word, just be there. And now Milo was doing the same. Mary, the neighbor who sometimes brought over soup or asked about the garden, called the next day to check on him after the storm. "Everything okay?" she asked through the screen door. Walter didn't know how to explain it, so he just said, "Yeah. Better than it's been in a while." As the days passed, Milo started to change. He still didn't bark, but his ears perked when Walter entered a room. He ate a little more. And one morning, when Walter stood by the back door with the leash in hand, Milo didn't hesitate. He walked forward. Slow but steady. They only made it to the end of the driveway that first time. Milo stopped at the mailbox and sat. Walter waited with him. No rush, no tugging. Just two figures in the soft light of morning, finding their rhythm. Again. Inside, the house began to breathe differently. Walter started opening the curtains a little earlier. The coffee stayed hot longer. The old record player, untouched for years, played low jazz as Milo napped near the front door. One afternoon, Walter sat on the porch, a blanket over his knees and a book in his lap. He wasn't reading. He was watching the clouds. Beside him, Milo lay stretched out, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. "You know," Walter said softly, "I didn't think I had it in me to care again." "But you you made space." Milo's tail gave a small thump. "Just once. Just enough." Walter smiled. That night, while cleaning out the guest room, Walter found a dusty old box. Inside were postcards Clara had collected, places they'd planned to go someday. Italy, the Grand Canyon. A tiny town in Nova Scotia she liked because of its name. He held one in his hand and sat on the edge of the bed. Milo padded into the room and curled up by the foot of the bed. "We never made it to any of them," Walter whispered. "But maybe maybe stories don't always need a destination." Milo didn't respond. But he didn't need to. In the quiet of that evening, surrounded by unspoken memories and the soft sound of a dog's breath, Walter realized something. The past may leave shadows, but sometimes all it takes is a quiet paw print to bring light back in. The morning air smelled different now, not because the seasons had changed, though spring was starting to stretch its fingers across the hills, but because something had shifted inside the small house near the railway. Walter Finch had always noticed the little things. The way the coffee bubbled just before it boiled. How Clara used to hum while folding laundry. How the clouds looked softer when the sun was lazy. Now, he noticed something new. The sound of paws on hardwood, not rushed, not loud, just there. A rhythm, a presence. Milo had been with him for nearly 2 weeks, and something was growing. Not quickly, not loudly, but surely, a kind of trust. A fragile thread between them. Every morning, Walter opened the front door and waited. And every morning, Milo would appear, sometimes after a moment, sometimes with a stretch and a yawn, and sit beside him on the porch. They watched the sun come up, listened to the trains in the distance, said nothing. Then, they walked. It started as just a few steps down the driveway, then to the corner. Then, one crisp morning, around the block. Walter didn't keep count. He let Milo choose the pace. When the dog paused to sniff a patch of grass or stare at a passing bird, Walter did too. And slowly, it stopped feeling like a chore and started feeling like a purpose. On their third walk around the neighborhood, they passed the small flower shop near the old bakery. The window was open, and a woman stood inside, arranging tulips in a vase. She glanced up and smiled. "Well, look who's out and about," she said cheerfully. Walter hesitated. He hadn't spoken to anyone besides Milo in days. "Good morning," he said quietly. "He yours?" she asked, nodding toward Milo. Walter looked at the dog, who was sitting patiently, eyes on a bee hovering nearby. "Yeah," he said. "I think so. He's calm," she said. "Most puppies bounce like rubber balls." Walter smiled faintly. "He's got an old soul." The woman laughed gently. "I'm Ellie," she said. "I own the shop. You and your friend are welcome. Anytime." Walter nodded, then kept walking. But that smile stayed with him the rest of the day. Later, back home, Milo lay by the back door, watching the yard. Walter stood in the kitchen, a postcard in his hand. He'd pulled them out again, Clara's old collection. This one showed a lighthouse in Maine. He picked up a pen and began to write. Dear Clara, today Milo and I made it past the bakery. A woman named Ellie said he has an old soul. Maybe she's right. Maybe we all do. He didn't know where he'd send it, maybe nowhere. But it felt good to write that evening. While the sun dipped behind the trees and the kitchen filled with the smell of warmed leftovers, Milo did something new. He picked up his empty food bowl and carried it carefully into the living room. He set it down in front of Walter and sat not begging, just showing up. Walter looked at him. You hungry, boy? Milo didn't wag his tail, but he blinked. Slowly, patiently. Walter stood and refilled the bowl. This time, Milo ate every last bite. When they sat on the porch after dinner, Walter spoke aloud, as he often did. You know, I used to think silence was peace, he said. But now I think silence just gives sadness more room to grow. Milo rested his head on Walter's foot. You're teaching me things, Walter added. The next morning, Ellie was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the shop when Walter and Milo passed by. She waved them in. Got a treat for your quiet buddy, she said, holding out a small paper bag. Walter smiled. Thank you. What's his name? She asked. Milo. Strong name, she said. He's changing you, isn't he? Walter looked down. Milo was sniffing the base of a potted lavender plant. Yeah, he said. More than I expected. They talked for a while, nothing deep. Just weather, plants, books, but something about it felt like a new door opening. That night, Walter sat at the kitchen table, a form in front of him. Mary, the neighbor, had mentioned it, a registration for emotional support animals. He'd brushed it off at first. But now, as he looked at the paper, he felt something settle in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held. But he knew this. Milo wasn't just a dog. He was a heartbeat. A shadow that had stepped into the light. Walter signed the form. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Milo lay curled on the rug, his breathing deep and even, and Walter, for the first time in years, felt something like tomorrow. The morning started with a soft rain, tapping gently against the windows. It wasn't loud or stormy, just a quiet reminder that the world was still turning. Walter Finch was already awake. He hadn't slept much, but not because of panic. This time, he had simply been thinking, not worrying, not grieving, just thinking. Milo lay at the foot of the bed, his breathing steady and soft. Walter reached down and gently rested a hand on the pup's back. Warm, calm, present. You still with me? Walter whispered. Milo single quotes ear twitched, but he didn't move. That was answer enough. After breakfast, they went for a walk. Not their usual short loop, but a longer route, one that passed the old school and the tiny park with the creaky swings. The clouds had lifted slightly, letting sunlight peek through like it was watching them. Walter didn't talk much that morning. He just listened to the birds, to the breeze, to the soft pat-pat of Milo's paws beside him. As they rounded the last corner, a voice called out from across the street. Mr. Finch? It was Ellie, waving from her flower shop with a watering can in her hand. You've been busy, she smiled, nodding toward a patch of dirt near his porch, where a few marigolds had begun to bloom. Those yours? Walter shrugged. Mostly Milo's idea. He's got strong opinions about sunlight. Ellie laughed, and Walter smiled without thinking. Later that week, an envelope arrived. Inside was the letter Walter had been waiting for. Stamped and signed. Official. Milo was now a registered emotional support animal. Walter stood by the window, the paper in hand, and looked down at the dog resting near the heater vent. They finally caught up, he said. They figured out what we already knew. That evening, Walter and Milo went into town together. It was their first time sitting at the outdoor cafe near the library. The waitress brought a bowl of water and a biscuit for Milo without being asked. The dog sat between Walter's feet, calm as ever. A couple at the next table asked his name. Milo, Walter replied. He's part of the family. The woman smiled. He looks like he understands everything. Walter nodded. He does, more than most people I know. As days passed, the house continued to change, not in big ways, but in the kind that mattered. Walter moved the old rocking chair into the sunroom, the one Clara used to sit in. He placed a new cushion on it and added a folded quilt over the back. He didn't use it, but sometimes he'd see Milo curled there, eyes half closed, listening. To the world outside. It felt right. One morning, Walter found Mary, his neighbor, kneeling in her garden again. She waved. "Those hands are finally getting dirty again," Walter teased. She laughed and wiped the soil on her pants. "This puppy of yours reminded me how to start over." "Me too," Walter said quietly. She nodded. Not needing more than that. A few weeks later, the local shelter reached out. They'd read about Milo in a small community blog Ellie had written. They asked if Walter would bring Milo in to meet a few seniors who were thinking about adopting. "You up for it, boy?" Walter asked as he clipped the leash to Milo's collar. The dog wagged his tail once. It was slow, sure. A yes. At the shelter, Milo stood beside Walter while a group of older folk shuffled in, some leaning on canes, others just looking unsure. One man with tired eyes stared at Milo like he didn't know what to say. Milo walked over and pressed gently into the man's leg. The man dropped to a bench and reached out, trembling. "You're real quiet," he said. Walter smiled from the side. That's how he says hello. 3 adoptions happened that day. The shelter sent Walter a thank you email. He printed it and pinned it to the wall near Milo's food bowl. That night, the house was still. Walter sat in the porch swing, a blanket around his shoulders. Milo was stretched out nearby, chin on the wooden floor, watching the sky. "We're still here," Walter said softly. "And I think that's something." Milo blinked, slow and peaceful. In the morning, Walter found a new postcard. Not in the box, but on the fridge, Clara's handwriting. One he hadn't seen in years. It read, "If you ever get lost, follow the quiet. It always knows the way home." He smiled, eyes damp but heart steady. Milo walked over and sat beside him, touching but not pressing, like he always did. Walter reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You didn't fix me," he said, "but you reminded me I wasn't broken." The wind moved gently through the garden, lifting the petals of the blooming marigolds. The world wasn't perfect, but it was breathing again. And sometimes, that was more than enough.